Well, we're up to video 9 in our Advanced Squad Leader video series. This is your host, ID Jester. Welcome back. Today I want to do a video tutorial and go over fire attacks. I did a previous video episode on squads and kind of glossed over a lot of their rules. So I wanted to go more in depth into the fire attack procedure. As you can see, we have numerous different counters on our map here inside our Vassal module, and we're going to use these to help explain some of the rules we're going to cover. I'm actually going to be using Microsoft Word as well for our text, because unfortunately in the Vassal module I found the text to be just too small for people to read. So I'm going to be using multiple different programs to help us explain some of these rules. We're talking about fire attacks. We are obviously talking about section A of the rule book, subsection number 7, fire attacks. Section 7.1, fire attacks are the main process by which enemy units attack enemy units. Fire attacks can occur during the prep fire phase and the advanced fire phase by the attacker, and in the movement phase and the defensive fire phase by the defender. But no unit can fire its inherent firepower, support weapon, or gun in more than one fire phase per player turn. Otherwise, players might fire all, some, or none of their units during that fire phase. Firepower modifiers. The firepower factors of an attacking unit can be doubled, tripled, or halved due to a variety of circumstances. Fractions of halved firepower factors are not dropped, nor are they rounded off. They are retained and subject to further modification or added to the fractional firepower factors of other units involved in the same attack. Firepower modifiers are cumulative. An attacker's firepower can be both doubled and halved, or it can be halved and halved again. And as a expletive, make sure that you always keep your fractions and add those fractions or half those fractions as well. Let's look at some of the different rules associated with things that can adjust your firepower of your different units. First one here is section 7.21, point blank fire. Small arms, machine gun, ATR, or IFE, firepower of an attacking unit is doubled while either adjacent to its target or adjacent to and within one level of or higher than its target. So point blank fire, your firepower will be doubled. Section 7.211, in the rare circumstance of TPBF, which stands for triple point blank fire, any PRC not buttoned up in a closed-top AFV, which are in an enemy occupied hex, are subject to the triple point blank fire. So in the rare circumstance when you have enemy units actually in your location, you're going to get triple point blank fire. So you're going to triple your firepower attack. It should be noted in section 7.2.1 on the target selection limits, a unit does not have the freedom to attack units in other location while its own location is occupied by a known enemy unit, unless the only known enemy unit in the location is an unarmored vehicle. So if you have other units in your location, other known enemy units, and it's not an unarmed or unarmored vehicle, you cannot attack other locations. Some of the other rules that will alter your firepower 7.12 Long Range Fire. A unit may attack beyond its normal range at a distance up to and including double its range, but it does so at half firepower. So if you have a range of 4, if you shoot at 5, 6, 7, or 8 hexes away, you're going to be at half firepower. 7.23 is area fire. A firepower of an attacking unit is halved if the target is concealed or for any application of an area fire penalty, and it's also halved again for each additional applicable use. So you can be halved and halved again on multiple different fire situations. Remember to keep those fractions. And also 7.24, the advanced fire phase, small arms, machine gun, ATR, IFE firepower of an attacking unit is halved, and the attack occurs during the advanced fire phase, even if the firing unit did not move that player turn, unless it's using opportunity fire. Opportunity fire, which we didn't get a chance to talk about before, is a very interesting and unique rule that a lot of players should look into because it brings a lot of possibilities into the game. Opportunity fire, any good order, infantry, cavalry, which is not yet fired or become TI during the player turn, may be placed beneath a bounding fire counter during its prep fire phase. Such placement removes any concealment status it may have had. If such a unit cannot fire during the prep fire phase or move during the movement phase. But if still unbroken, unpinned, it may fire during the advanced fire phase without the penalty of the advanced fire. So what does all that mean in English? Well, if we look at our situation here, what that means is, as we talked about before in some of our video tutorials, if we go through the prep fire phase and your unit's prep fire, just going to throw a few counters out here. When they prep fire, they're not able to move during the movement phase. If the units do not have a prep fire counter on them, they can move, and then during the advanced fire phase, they can attack at half firepower. So in this case, there are some situations in which you might want to place your units during the prep fire phase in with a bounding fire marker so that it can opportunity fire during the advanced fire phase at full firepower. An example of this is set up during our little scenario here. You notice our counters here in S8. There's a couple German Elite 838s, a light machine gun, and a 9.1 liter. You know it's a German prep fire phase because of our phase disc over here. Has the axis side up, and it also has the prep fire counter towards the top. So it's the prep fire phase of the axis player. If we look at our unit here in S8, it has 19 firepower and a -1 liter with it. The unit that it's looking at attacking is over here in S5, but you notice that this unit is concealed. We already remember from a previous rule that we talked about, if a unit is concealed, you are at half firepower. If you look at our rule here, alright, 7.23, firepower for an attacking unit is halved if the target is concealed. So in this case, if you look back at our Vassal module here, if we were to attack with our 9.1 liter, our German elite squads, firepower of 19, half firepower if we're shooting at the unit in S5. So it's going to drop down to 9.5. If we look at our chart here, our IFT, we notice there is no 9.5 column. So we're going to go to the highest column that equals or does not exceed your total firepower. So the highest column that does not equal or exceed it would be the 8th column. So we would attack on the 8 fire column with that attack because this unit is making us lose half firepower. It is within normal range, 838. The middle number is a range. So 1, 2, 3 hexes away. There is no hindrances. We do have line of sight. It is in a wood building. S5 is a wood building. So we're going to get a +2 to our dice roll for the wood building. But we are going to get a -1 for our leader, which means we will only have a +1 to our dice roll. And we will roll on the 8 firepower column, which is still a pretty good attack, but nothing special. But if you think about the possibilities of what can happen here, since our prep fire phase and numerous other German units have not actually prep fired, we can assume that some of these units are going to move during the movement phase. And if the German player is thinking about it, he might think that, okay, I could take this unit here in Q5, a 4.36 and a light machine gun. I can move them up into R5. And I can take this unit here in Q6, which is a 4.67 and an 8.0 leader. I could move them into R5, putting a lot of firepower right here adjacent to these units, which would possibly make the American player fire at them. If the American player does fire, it's going to lose its concealment counter. If the American loses his concealment counter, then during the advanced fire phase, when we have set up our opportunity fire, this unit no longer has to be halved because the American player is no longer concealed. So opportunity fire is a way to mark your units during the prep fire phase. They don't get to prep fire during the prep fire phase, and they don't get to move during the movement phase. And during the advanced fire phase, if they're still able to, they can then fire at full firepower. So again, if during the movement phase the German moves these units up, puts the pressure on the American here, whether or not he's going to defensive fire. If the American unit decides to defensive fire, it will lose its concealment counter. If he loses his concealment counter, then when we attack it during the advanced fire phase, we're going to attack it with 19 firepower, which would drop down to the 16 column, as opposed to attack it on the 8 column. So we have a greater chance of doing more damage to that enemy unit. So the rules associated with opportunity fire, you set them up during the prep fire phase. They don't get to prep fire. During your movement phase, they don't get to move. And they have to wait until the advanced fire phase. So they have to resist all defensive fire. If they become pinned or broken during the defensive fire phase, then when the advanced fire phase comes, they can't do anything. But if they make it into the advanced fire phase, and they're still able to fire, they do not fire at half firepower, which is one of the exceptions to the rules we talked about. Again, I like to preface my videos by saying I don't cover every rule specifically. I just talk about in general terms that there are other rules in the rule book, and this is a great example of one of the ones that I have not mentioned in a previous video, that if you read through your rule book and study the rule book, you can find these hidden exceptions to some of the rules that are out there that maybe I don't go into. But I thought I would bring this up in this video because it is a great strategy tactic for players that are the attacker during the turn to use if they know they can not get a very good shot during the prep fire phase, but if they're able to have their enemy units lose concealment during the lose their concealment by shooting during the defensive fire phase or anything like that, then it's a great opportunity for them to get a better attack during the advanced fire phase. So that is opportunity fire. That is section 7.25 of the rule book. As we talk about some of the rules and things associated with ASL, I do want to talk about, I specifically set up this squads the way I did here because I want to bring up a point about some of the aspects related to the different units and how they're affected on the IFT chart. You can see there are several columns on the IFT chart: 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 30, and 36. These are the only numbers that are going to matter to you. You notice our German 838s have an 8 firepower inherently with them. So if there was 2 of them, they would be 16. 3 of them would be 24. The point I'm making with this is that you notice that one of them is carrying around a light machine gun, which has got a firepower of 3. If we go back to our IFT chart here, you notice 8 plus 3 is 11, which does not help this unit bring it up to another column. Unlike if this light machine gun was attached to a unit that had 6 firepower, if we attached it with a 647, then the 6 plus the 3 would be 9. 9 firepower would actually go on the 8 column. And even when we double our units here, 8 and 8 is 16 plus 3 is 19. If we look at our IFT again, 19 is one short of the 20 column, which is then going to drop it down to the 16 column, which is just like firing the 2 838s by themselves. So think about this when you're setting up your different units with your different support weapons. In this case, our 838s, there's no advantage for them to have the light machine gun. It's not going to allow them to move up in columns very often, as opposed to if that machine gun was, say, with this 467. The 467 plus the 3 for the machine gun would be 7 as opposed to 4. You notice that it would get an extra column shift by having that light machine gun. So I just wanted to mention that as well, since we're talking about the different units and the different support weapons. Since we're talking about the chart here, let's talk about the IFT chart. You notice there are different results that you can obtain, and so I wanted to cover kind of a little more in depth than I did last time about what each of these results mean. If we look at our Rule 7.31, if it has a number KIA, that represents that number of units is eliminated. So if it's a 2 KIA, it means there are 2 units that are eliminated. You determine which units are eliminated by random selection. Any unit that's not eliminated are automatically broken. And of course, there's exceptions to this as well. Units which cannot be broken suffer casualty reductions instead. So the KIA, whatever number the KIA is, that's the number of units that are eliminated by random selection. All the other targets are automatically broken. Units that can't be broken suffer casualty reductions. So that's the best result you can get, obviously, to kill off units and automatically break all the other units. The next best result is section 7.302, which is K/ and a number. K/number, what that represents is at least one target must suffer casualty reduction, and all other units, including any just reduced half squads, must take a morale check, adding the number indicated to the morale check die roll. So if it's K/2, all the units that are making the morale check are going to add 2 to the dice roll to see if they pass their morale check. Again, random selection is used to determine which of multiple targets will suffer casualty reduction. Casualty reduction eliminates any half squad or crew and wounds a single man counter. And the wound, depending on the severity, might actually eliminate the single man counter. So obviously KIA is your best result. Second best result is K/ a number. Another result you might get is section 7.303 and NMC. NMC. Each target unit must attempt to pass a morale check by making a die roll equal to or less than the morale level of the unit. You always do morale checks with your best leader first. And normally, if you fail your morale check, those units are usually broken. So a normal morale check, 7.304 is your number, and with a morale check, either 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's the same as your normal morale check, although you add the number before the MC to your morale check die roll. So if it's 2 MC, your opponent's going to be adding 2 to his dice for each of his units that need to make a morale check, so they have a greater chance of failing their morale check. Finally, 7.305 is a PTC. A PTC result forces an unbroken target personnel target to take a normal task check. Those which fail are pinned, not broken. So PTC's a pin task check. You're basically going to take a normal task check. If you fail it, you're pinned. You're not broken. You'll get a pin counter on you. Broken units, though, never make a pin task check, although they may become pinned during interdiction by passing a morale check with the highest die roll possible. And finally, the last results, 7.306 is a blank which has no effects. So obviously, if we look at our vassal controls here, we can see the lower numbers you roll, the better results you can get. The higher numbers, the worse results you have. And obviously, the more firepower you have, the better chance you have of getting better results with the same dice roll. So if we look at a 7, has no effect on 1 firepower, no effect on 2, has a pin task check on a 4, has a normal morale check on a 6, a 1 MC on an 8, 1 MC on a 12, a 2 MC on a 16, etc., etc. So the more firepower you can put into a fire attack, the higher you'll be on the column, and the lower you can roll on your 2 6-sided dice, the better you'll be, the better results you can get. Alright, section 7.35, SW usage. So we're talking about our support weapons now. All weapons on a half-inch counter are support weapons and must be possessed by an unbroken personnel unit in order to fire them. So your support weapons are going to have to be associated with a squad or half squad or sometimes leaders that can actually fire them. And there are rules that govern them. 7.351, a squad may fire one support weapon or gun without the squad losing its inherent firepower. This inherent firepower can be added to the support weapon attack in the case of an MG, or used for a separate attack in the same fire phase. A squad may never fire more than 2 support weapons in the same fire phase, although it may fire 2 different types. A squad using 2 support weapons loses its inherent firepower. So a full squad can fire 1 support weapon and still retain its inherent firepower, or it can fire 2 support weapons, but it loses its inherent firepower until the close combat phase. A crew, a half squad, or a single man counter that fires a support weapon or gun loses its inherent firepower until close combat. So a full squad can fire 1 and keep its firepower, or it can fire 2 and lose its inherent firepower. A crew, a half squad, or a single man counter can either use its inherent firepower or use its support weapon, not both. There are, of course, restrictions and exceptions to every rule. 7.353 in both of the above cases. Subsequent first fire, final protective fire, and final fire versus adjacent units retain halved inherent firepower for those attacks. Although use of a full support weapon or gun capability during those attacks can negate their inherent firepower in the normal manner. So that's important when you're setting up your units and you're trying to decide what units to put with weapons. For example, here we already talked about the light machine gun. This light machine gun would probably be used with other squads better. Probably more likely this 548, because 5 is its inherent firepower plus the 3 for the machine gun. Gets them up to that 8 column, which is really good for it, having that 8 firepower as opposed to a 5. There's a big difference between this unit having the machine gun and these units, because if we look at our table here, the 5 goes down to the 4 column. If that 5 squad had the machine gun, its firepower would be 8. So in this case, it goes up 2 columns by having that light machine gun with him, as opposed to having it with those 838s, elites, which it does nothing for. Alright, so now we're going to talk about fire groups. Fire groups. All members of a fire group must be able to trace line of sight to the target. Should the line of sight of any fire group member be subject to a hindrance or a TEM, the worst possible case applies to all members of the fire group. For this reason, it is often wise to break up such a fire group and have its component parts attacked separately. A multi-location fire group, which discovers that one or more of its units' line of sight is blocked, forfeits that participation of only those units whose line of sight was blocked. Fire group other units with a valid line of sight may still attack the same target, unless it was eliminated by a previous attack. After resolving the blocked fire's die roll, but as a smaller fire group or as a separate attack. Fire direction, when we're talking about fire groups, we also can have it be fire directed. A single leader cannot direct more than one weapon or unit per phase, unless they are part of the same fire group. Hence, a squad that elects to use its inherent firepower in a different attack than that of its machine gun it is manning does not get the leadership benefit if given to the machine gun instead. However, a leader can direct the fire of a machine gun as many times as that machine gun can fire, even if he also directed other units as part of the fire group in the machine gun's previous attack. Leader direction used during defensive first fire can also be used again in subsequent first fire, final protective fire, and final fire, but again only for one firing unit or fire group, and that unit's support weapons can only include fire he directed during the first fire. And last, when we're talking about fire groups, one of the last rules I want to cover is 7.531. A leader may use his leadership die roll modifier to modify the infantry fire table die roll of any one attacking unit or fire group per player turn, provided all firing units of the fire group are in the same location. Didn't mean to do that, I meant to do this. There we go. A leadership die roll modifier may be employed with a multi-hex location fire group only if a leader directing that attack is present in every location. The leadership die roll modifier in effect is that of the lowest quality participating leader. A leader affects the 2-hit die roll of all ordnance support weapons, not the effects of those hits on the IFT or AFV to kill table, nor the chance of a weapon malfunctioning. A leader directing fire is treated as if he were firing. So, what does all this mean? Well, what this means is we can create fire groups from having multiple different locations, combine all their firepower together. So if we look at Q5 here, which has a 4.36, which has a light machine gun, and we have a unit in Q6, a 4.67 with an 8.0 leader. During the prep fire phase, the German player can select all of these units to fire together in the same phase, in the same attack. So we would simply add up our firepower here. Depending on who we're choosing to attack, they have to make sure they all have line of sight. So if we were going to attack this unit here in P5, we would just simply add our firepower here. 4 and 3 is 7. Remember, our 7 gets doubled because of point blank fire. We're adjacent here. The firepower in this is 4, which is doubled again, which is 8. That's going to give us a total firepower of 22. So if we look at our infantry fire table for 22, we can quickly see that we were going to go down to the column that does not exceed our total firepower. In this case it's 20, and we will then roll on the 20 column based upon our terrain effect modifiers and any bonuses or penalties associated with line of sight or TEM. If we were trying to create a fire group here, M7 and N7, these two units here could fire group together to attack M5. They both have line of sight to the unit. But if these two units could not fire group together to attack the unit in P8, because there's a hedge in the way here, that hedge, this unit can see line of sight from N7 to P8, put this unit here in M7, cannot see P8. So these two units could not fire group together to attack this unit. These two units could fire group together to attack this one. To remove my prep fire counters over here. When we're talking about our fire group, alright, here, actually lost a section here, so had to re-add it in. Section 7.5 actually talks about fire groups here. Two or more units or weapons joining together to make a combined fire attack are a fire group. Two single-man counters manning the same support weapon are not a fire group, as they are considered one combined firing unit. A fire group may consist of units from more than one location only if each participating unit location is adjacent to one another. Let's underline that. Only if each participating unit occupies a location adjacent to another participating unit of the same fire group. It is possible to have a fire group composed of virtually unlimited string of adjacent locations, provided each location in the fire group contains a personnel unit that is going to participate in the attack. A leader alone in a location cannot be linked in a fire group unless he's heroic or firing a support weapon, because each location of a fire group must participate in the attack, and a leader normally has no attack capabilities. So if we look at our different fire group combinations on our vassal module here, we can see that we have some units that are adjacent over here, we have some units that are adjacent here, we have units that are in the same hex that can form a fire group with the leader there. We have some units that are adjacent here, but these units, can these units form a fire group? These three units, you can see there's a 468, a 70 leader, and a 338. These units cannot form a fire group. Cannot form a fire group because each location must be adjacent to another location that can fire to be part of the fire group. This leader cannot fire, so we cannot form a fire group with these adjacent units. Think about that when you're doing your advance phase, trying to set up for the next turn. Make sure when you advance up, you try to keep your units so that you can create fire groups for the following turn. The other rule restriction we talked about when we're talking about fire groups is fire direction. A leader can direct the fire of a let's see, where was it here? Down here. A leader may use his leadership die roll modifier to modify the IFT die roll of any one attacking unit or fire group per turn, provided all firing units are in the same location. A leadership die roll modifier may be employed with a fire group only if a leader directed that attack is present in every location. So if we look at our units here in T6, U6, if we form a fire group here, there's two different locations. We have leaders in both locations, so we can actually use our leaders, the leadership with the lowest modification. In this case, they both happen to be 8-1 leaders. So if we formed a fire group between these units, and they were to fire at S5, they would have 4 firepower from this unit. They would have 4 firepower from this unit. Since there is a leader in both hexes, you take the lowest class leader, the lowest leadership modifier. In this case, they're both the same, -1. So they would get a -1 to their attack. If, for some reason, we can assume that there's a different leader in here. Let's see. Okay, if this leader had become ELR'd sometime during the scenario, or just maybe started as an 8-0 leader, these units here could form a fire group. Since they have leaders in every location, um, you could use the leader with the lowest leadership modifier. In this case is a 0. So there is no bonus in having leaders associated with this fire group, because you're not going to get a leadership modifier that's going to help you in that attack. So that's something to keep in mind, as opposed to having the 8-1, 8-1 combination where you were going to get a -1 to your attack. This one here is all a single location, so this leader would add his -1 to the attack of this fire group, which if we decide to attack with all these units at the same time, would become a fire group. This group here could become a fire group, although you wouldn't get the leadership modifier. In this case it's 0, so it wouldn't matter. And of course this over here in N303P2 could not form a fire group based on the rules for fire grouping. This here could not form a fire group if they wanted to attack P8, and these two units could form a fire group to attack M5. Let's look at some of the other rules here when we're talking about infantry and fire attacks. There is a stacking limit. For infantry, each side may stack up to 3 squads or their equivalent, plus up to 4 single-man counters per location without penalty. Hexes which have additional vertical locations within their horizontal hex are entitled to their own separate stacking limits for each level of that hex. Stacking limits can be exceeded only at certain risk and inconvenience to all the friendly units therein. There's some movement restrictions when we're talking about stacking. Entrance of a location overstacked by personnel costs 1 additional movement factor for each squad in the location that exceeds normal stacking limits. Vehicles must pay 1 movement point for each overstacked squad or equivalent, in addition to any overstacking movement cost for vehicles. There's also attack penalties, which is section 5.12, and also section 5.13, which talks about defensive penalties when we're talking about stacking limits. One of the last things we want to talk about is another interesting rule that kind of gets glossed over and forgotten about quite a bit. Is 7.7, Encirclement. Basically, any non-aerial infantry or vulnerable PRC of an immobile vehicle fired on consecutively during the same prep fire, defensive fire, or advanced fire by 2 or more non-aerial units using their inherent firepower, their support weapons, at equal to or less than normal range is subject to encirclement. The attacks consisting in encirclement must be resolved consecutively. If a player fires at a different target at the interim, he cannot use previous attacks as the basis for his encirclement. There are several different ways that encirclement can happen depending on the line of sight that enters the target location. A, through opposite hex spines. B, with exactly 3 target hex vertexes between them in both clockwise and counterclockwise directions. Or C, through 3 non-contiguous hex sides. An encirclement can be created by a location directly above or below or in a building hex. The qualifying target location is thereafter marked with an encirclement counter, and every non-berserk, non-heroic enemy personnel unit suffers an immediate 1-level drop in morale to both the attack that sealed its encirclement and any other attack made against that location, as long as it's marked. as encircled. Once it's been marked, all fire from an encircled unit is subject to a +1 die roll modifier on the IFT, or +1 to the 2-hit die roll if it's ordnance. The movement factor cost of the first location entered, regardless of phase, by an encircled unit is doubled. So once the location has been marked with an once you do an attack that you can get an encirclement, claim an encirclement on, it's going to get an encirclement counter, which I'm sure I could probably find here, which is this one. Once it's marked with encirclement, there are many different rules associated with that. They're going to lose 1 to their morale. If they go to attack, they're going to get a -1. They're going to add +1 to their attack, and movement point costs to enter the next hex is cost double the movement factors. So, for example, if we were to prep fire this unit here into this hex, and our very next attack, we took this unit here and prep fired it into this attack, then we can claim encirclement because we've now attacked from 2 different locations, one after the other. There was no other attacks in between. We can claim an encirclement on this hex. So any other attack into that hex is then going to get that bonus as well. They're basically going to lose 1 to their morale. So you can see our 747 unit is going to lose 1 to its morale. Our 9-1 leader is going to lose 1 to its morale as well. So they'll have a greater chance of breaking due to your attack. When they go to attack back, if the time comes, the American player's turn, and they go to choose to fire back, they will be restricted by having a +1 to their attack. And if they choose to try to move out of their location, it's going to cost double the normal movement factors to move into an adjacent hex. And lastly on our list of things to talk about is a very important part of ASL and squads, and that is section 7.9 Cowering. In infantry table attacks are adversely affected by an IFT resolution die roll that results in original doubles unless a leader directs that attack. The penalty for rolling doubles without leadership direction is that the attack is resolved on the next lower column of the infantry fire table. An attack on the lowest column which cowers is reduced to no effect at all, although a malfunction results can still occur. In addition, any unit that cowers is automatically marked with a final or prep fire counter as appropriate. Countering affects all fires except that of single man counters, berserk, fanatic units. You see a whole list of different exceptions there. Cowering fire penalties are doubled, which are going to resolve 2 columns lower for any attack by inexperienced personnel. Cowering does not affect close combat or DC resolution. If a fire group cowers, random selection is used to determine the unit that becomes marked with a prep or final fire counter. We're talking about double columns, 2 columns on the IFT for an attack by inexperienced personnel. If we look up section 19.3, our inexperienced personnel, a green MMC stacked with an unbroken leader is exempt from any rules as inexperienced personnel, but all the rules would apply to any conscripts or unarmed units regardless of leadership presence. So remember when we were looking at our squads, we talked about our different kinds of squads. We have here in Q5, you notice that this 436 with the light machine gun has got a C on its counter. That means it's a conscript. It doesn't matter if this unit is with the leader or not. If it cowers, it's going to lose 2 columns on the infantry fire table if it rolls natural doubles. We talk about natural doubles. We're talking about if you roll a 1-1, 2-2, 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 6-6. These are your natural dice rolls. So if this unit, the conscript in Q5, has a firepower of 7, if it's attacking this unit here, which is P4, 336, we have a firepower of 4 for the squad. We have a firepower of 3 for the light machine gun, which is 7. It is doubled for point blank fire. 7 is going to be resolved on the 6th column. If that squad rolls, say, a 2-2, it's actually going to be resolved down 2 columns because it's a inexperienced unit. So it'll be resolved on the 2 column. If, for example, this unit up here in R1, it is a 237 half squad. We can tell that because there's only 2 silhouettes of men on that counter. If this is a full squad, yes, okay. 237 has a medium machine gun. If they chose to fire the medium machine gun in the prep fire phase, it has a firepower of 5. Remember from our rules earlier, half squads can either use their inherent firepower or they can use their support weapons, not both. So in this case, the half squad would either shoot with its own 2 firepower or it would shoot with the machine gun with a 5 firepower. Obviously, it's probably going to use the machine gun for 5 firepower. If this unit, the 5 firepower is going to be resolved in the 4 column. If this unit rolls a 4-4, it's going to cower and it's going to go down 1 column, down to the 2 column, and then whatever the bonuses and penalties, you will figure it out on that column based on terrain effect modifiers and everything. If we look at our unit here in S8, if we were to use these units here, they form a fire group and we attack the unit here in S5. Okay, we have 16 firepower. There's no need in using the light machine gun. Since we don't need the firepower, we will not use the machine gun because if we roll natural 12 on this, we could actually break the light machine gun. So by not including the machine gun, even if you roll a 12, it's not going to break the light machine gun at least, since we don't need its firepower. So in this case, we have 16 firepower. It's going to be halved for being concealed unit. So it's going to be on the 8 column. If this unit rolls a 3-3, this unit does not cower. Because, why does it not cower? Because it has a leader in its hex that's directing the attack. As a note, some of the other things we talked about, if we were to form a fire group here of our 467 and our 436 and the light machine gun, if the leader directs this fire attack, it won't cower because there's a leader with that. The other thing to keep in mind is that if the 436 chooses not to become part of the fire group, maybe this fire group is going to attack this unit here. Move that out of the way for right now. This fire group here is going to attack this unit, but the 436 wants to attack this unit here. The 436, because the rule restrictions on the leaders can only direct one attack or fire group. If this squad decides that it's going to fire its machine gun here, and then it wants to shoot over here for itself, then the leader does not direct that attack. It's not part of the fire group. So only a squad that fires its machine gun as part of the fire group and targets the same target that's directed by the leader gets the bonus for that. And as a note, if this is formed as a fire group here and they do an attack against this hex here, and we were able to roll a 1 on the colored sided dice, in that case the prep fire counter would go on the squad, but we kept rate of fire with our machine gun. This one here would also receive a prep fire counter. Oops. But the leader could then direct this machine gun to fire again, and again, and again, as long as the German player kept rolling a 1 on his colored dice, because it would retain its rate of fire that way, and the leader had started directing the attack with the light machine gun, so it can continue supporting that machine gun through as many attacks as it can take. Let's see if there's anything else I missed. I think that was pretty much all I wanted to talk about for this episode, fire attacks. Some of the information about opportunity fire. You can place some of your units in your prep fire phase with the bounding fire counter instead. Let's use this one over here. That unit then cannot prep fire. It cannot move during the movement phase. And if it can attack during the advanced fire phase, it can do so, but it does not receive any kind of penalty for the advanced fire phase like all the other units would. So in certain situations, like we talked about, if these units were to move up adjacent to this American unit, the American unit can choose not to fire at them to keep its concealment, but if it chose to fire at them, then it would lose its concealment counter. During the advanced fire phase, then when these guys would get full firepower and they wouldn't be halved because this unit was concealed. So there are opportunities for you to use that opportunity fire trick to help you get more firepower in the advanced fire phase. Also, as a note on that, one thing I forgot to mention, that if these units are using opportunity fire and during the advanced fire phase the light machine gun gets rate of fire, it will actually keep his rate of fire. So you can use rate of fire with that machine gun in the advanced fire phase if you decide to add it into your attack. So we talked about that. We talked about encirclement. If you can get an attack against the unit and attack it with the next attack at a different direction, there's some charts there in the rule book that show you the different directions that you can get for an encirclement attack. Once the unit's encircled, it's going to lose its 1 to its morale, and it's going to add 1 to its attacks, and it's going to cost double for it to move. Fire groups, if you're all in one location, Leader can be led, and you can get the leadership bonus. If you're in multiple locations, you need to have multiple leaders to get any kind of leadership modifier. To have a fire group in the adjacent locations, every unit must be able to fire. Unlike this, if, for example, we had this unit in that hex, we could obviously then form a nice fire group here, because every adjacent location has somebody in that can fire. When forming a fire group, make sure that all your units have line of sight. If there's any kind of hindrance that's going to affect your fire group, for example, if there was maybe a grain hex here, which is going to be a hindrance, that was going to block this guy's fire attack, or actually hinder it. It's not going to block it, it's going to hinder it. It might be better to create a fire group with just these units and keep this unit out of the fire group, because his hindrance will affect the whole fire group, as opposed to just his fire. So sometimes, based on the different hindrances, line of sight issues, you might want to include certain units in, and other times you won't. Remember, your squads can fire 2 support weapons and lose its firepower, or it can fire 1 support weapon and its firepower, such as this unit here. Half squads, which are 2 silhouettes, can either fire their inherent firepower or support weapon firepower, one or the other. Squads, by the way, can fire 2 support weapons instead of their own firepower. So if this guy had 2 light machine guns, if we take the light machine gun on this hex here, this squad here, full squad, could fire both of the light machine guns, but it would lose its own firepower. So it's in either fire 1 and its own firepower, which is 7 firepower, or it could fire both of the light machine guns, which would be an 8 firepower. So decisions. Remember, when you're attacking and adding your firepower up, when you half your number, keep your fractions together. When you're doubling them, tripling them, and then halving them, it can become kind of complex to figure out what the total firepower is, but you keep all those fractions until so you can add them up together. Make sure you remember your stacking limits in a hex, and also keep in mind that any hex that's attacked on the IFT chart, each unit is going to have to take the result. So if you put more units in a hex, it's more units that have to resist that attack. So there's benefits for having units, multiple units in a hex, and there's benefits of having single units in adjacent hexes as opposed. If this 546 here was to attack N3 and do a normal morale check, I'd only have to check 1 unit. If all these units, let's say it was in this hex, and the 546 did a normal morale check, I'd have to make 4 different normal morale checks. One for the leader first. You always do your morale checks with your highest, best leader first. And then I'd have to make checks for all of the other units. In that case, I'd have to make 4 checks total to see whether or not I resisted his attack. In consequence, by having all these units stacked in one hex, I can obviously get a better attack with my fire group led by my leader. So there's bonuses and penalties, which you find out the more you look at the rule book and understand ASL. Normally, if there's any kind of bonus associated with doing a certain maneuver or a certain tactic, there's also some kind of disadvantage to doing it as well. Well, I hope this video went a little more in depth on the infantry fire table, getting your column to figure out what the highest column is that doesn't not exceed your firepower. If I had a 20 firepower, I could use the 20 chart. If I had a 19 firepower, I could only use the 16 chart. When you're setting up your units with your different support weapons, calculate how much firepower they're going to have with the weapons and figure out which units work best with weapons. Also remembering about the cowering, your conscripts and green units, when they fire without a leader in their hex and they roll doubles, they're going to lose 2 columns. Any other unit that fires without a leader in their hex that rolls doubles are going to cower 1 column down. So cowering is a very bad thing. So you can see that having your leaders in hexes with some of your better weapons, such as a machine gun here. This medium machine gun here has a rate of fire of 2 on it, so possibly we could get several attacks out of it. We want a weapon. We don't want this weapon cowering and losing its fire attack power. So make sure you put your leaders in hexes that can help support some of your better weapons and keep these weapons from cowering, or keep your squads from cowering and losing columns. When you're setting up your units, again, putting weapons in with your inexperienced crews, your inexperienced squads. You have to think about these squads without a leader are going to cower down 2 hexes. So you might want to put your machine guns and your support weapons in some of your elite units, your first line units, as opposed to some of your lower class units like your second line or your conscripts or green units. Well, I'm hoping that covers most of everything we talked about with fire groups, the infantry fire table, how you resolve things on the fire table, what the little numbers and symbols mean. 2MC, it's a morale check. You're going to add 2 to the dice, so it's harder to pass. PTC, pin task check, to find out whether you pin or not. 3 KIA, 3 units are going to die. Random selection. Everybody else that does not die in that hex will automatically be broken. So different results. They're not that hard. If you're not sure, hopefully this video was able to go through some of that and help you out. As usual, hope this video was helpful, and I'll try to do better next time. Until then, this is ID Jester signing off.